Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water. A closer look at agriculture in South Carolina and conversations between the current and future leaders of the Palmetto State's largest industry. Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water is a production of the student media team at the South Carolina Governor's School for Agriculture at John De La Howe.
Welcome into this edition of Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water. My name is Bella TENCH. I'm joined by my co-host Lane Gibson. Today our guest is GLEN PAYNE. He is a horticulturalist stationed at the Clemson University Co-op Service Office in Beaufort County. Officially, Mr. Payne is an urban horticulturalist. We'll find what that means and take a look at his work in South Carolina's Lowcountry. Welcome to our show, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Bella.
So what I was kind of wondering is what kind of sparked your interest in agriculture?
What really sparked my interest in agriculture was just the desire to be outside.
Okay.
That was really the main driving force, because it seemed like the more I hung around the house, the more chores I had to do. And if I was outside, there was a whole new world to explore out there.
So I kind of want to know, how did you get involved in agriculture?
I got involved in agriculture through my family. They farmed, and they had corn and soybeans, tomatoes and strawberries. So it's always been a part of my family with farming. And after I was old enough to actually go to work, my father was kind enough to take me down the street and drop me off at Mr. Lee Townsend's house, who needed some help for the summer. So I spent the rest of my summer picking sugar corn and tomatoes. And after that, I went to work at an experimental farm. And with the experimental farm, they work with Clemson doing sweet potato research. And so that's really kind of what got me involved. Those were the three main things that got me into agriculture and being outside and leading me down this path.
So what about in school? Were you ever in like FFA, or were you ever involved in that?
I was not. Okay. I was more involved on the working side at home.
Okay.
Didn't have a lot of time for extracurriculars because I was needed on the farm. So it was to school and then back to work once school was out. So that didn't have a lot of time for FFA or other things like that. There was time for football, but that kind of came and went, and the football career didn't go very far, but farming did.
Hey, I love it. So what about, can you kind of tell me a little bit like what you do? How does it, I know you're doing the Clemson extensions, but how does that work in the Lowcountry? I want to know kind of how does it operate?
So what I do in the Lowcountry for Beaufort, Jasper, Colleton, Hampton County, I'm what's called an urban horticulturist. And so I work a lot with the local landscapers and the local nurseries, local growers, any issues they may have. I also help with their certifications and their IPM programs with applying pesticides, help them with their testing, help them to get their credentialing and maintain their credentialing so that they're applying chemicals safely into the environment, since that's sort of a hot topic now. So that's several things that I do, as well as I head up the Master Gardener program, which is a volunteer program for the citizens in the community. And they're sort of an extension of me at Clemson and helping me get the message out to folks in the community. So they work at local farmers markets. They'll also volunteer at some of the camellia gardens that have been donated on Hilton Head, things like that. So that's kind of really what keeps me busy. It involves so much more. I collaborate with ladies in the office that are involved with the 4-H program. We also have forestry natural resource agent that's in our office. So I work with Miss Amanda Taylor, and she could not be here today, sorry to say. She was going to come in also to be interviewed. So we collaborate. We work with Carolina Clearwater, which is a program of Clemson Extension, in protecting our waterways here in South Carolina, specifically in the Lowcountry. You had asked what I do. I field a lot of questions about palm trees and citrus trees, be it lemons, limes, oranges. That's a lot of what I do on the daily basis. If I had to give you a top 3 of questions I answer, it would be questions on turf grass would be number 1, Irrigation would probably be number 2, and what is wrong with my citrus tree would probably be number 3. That would be my big top 3 there.
Now, do you work any with like flower beds, kind of in that area too? I know you said landscaping, so do you kind of work in that area or not really?
That would be under your ornamentals and your floral. So we do work a lot with florals, staying up with new varieties that are coming out, plants that are being bred to be more disease resistant. As climate change is becoming an issue, a lot of flowers that do well in a hotter environment and use less water. So those are 2 things. A lot of the breeders are making their goal with climate change. So those are things that we work with landscapers for, on how they can use those in their designs and how to best, maintain our natural resources that we have with water specifically.
Okay. So I want to know how you kind of heard about our school. I know we've only been about 4 or 5 years, but how did you kind of hear about our school?
I heard about the governor's school through my middle son, James. And James is actually a musician, and he was talking about the governor's school, and I really didn't know what the governor's school was. I had heard about it. We had been to Greenville, walked across the bridge, saw the big, beautiful buildings, didn't know what they were, heard about the governor's school. And then about 3 weeks ago, fast forward, I went to the watermelon field today at the Edisto Rec with Dr. Gilbert, and ran into Mr. Eric McCall. And Mr. McCall and I, we just started talking, and as we began to talk, he was telling me about what it is you all do here at De La Howe at the Governor's School with agriculture, and it seemed like a good fit. And he asked if I had any time and would be able to come in and maybe talk to classes for some professional development and programming. So immediately got on the phone and said yes, and then was interrupted by Tropical Storm Debbie and had to postpone. So that's what led me to being here 2 weeks later. So that's how I heard about it.
Who was your mentor growing up? Kind of in agriculture, who? I know you talked about your family. That's how you kind of got into it. But is there a specific person?
I would say mentor was probably, once I got to the university level, Dr. Ray Weil was my mentor. He was a he still is a soils professor, and he worked with Dr. Niall Brady, and they wrote a book called Properties of Soil Science, and it's now in its 15th publication. And with Dr. Weil, he declared that every major event in the world has been determined by soils. And so every class, kids would challenge him on what world event was solved by soils, and he somehow would tie it together and relate it to this was decided by the soil composition. It rained at this time. This army was bogged down, therefore this one won. So he would kind of tie it together. And he mentored me along, guided me, taught me in soil judging, things like that, and was able to kind of quench my thirst for knowledge that I had more than I could. It was literally drinking from a fire hose with all the information, and it sometimes feels that way working in extension. But as far as being a mentor, he challenged me regularly and provided me all the information that I could ever ask for. And more importantly, I think as a mentor, he taught me how to learn and let me know that the journey is not always a straight path. A lot of times it'll twist and turn to get to where you're going, and it'll be interrupted by life, but you stay the course, and you keep it very simple and very focused on what you're working on, and you'll be very successful doing that if you can just focus on one thing at a time. And that was a big part of his mentoring for me.
So what's your favorite part about being a horticulturalist?
That's a great question. If I had to pick one favorite part about being a horticulturist, it is going to be giving back what knowledge that I have about horticulture, gardening, vegetables, flowers, being able to give that information away, it opens the door to conversations with folks. It's very much a common ground when you get your hands in the dirt and you kind of know where folks are coming from. If they want to get in there and they want to work and you can work right beside them, I would say that's probably the best part, is the giving away part. And you're more being a servant to your community and the knowledge that you've gained. I feel like at some point I've probably forgotten more than some people know through their education. And it's really nice to be able to work with folks in the community and give that knowledge back to them and to see them prosper and be successful. Because gardening can be frustrating a little bit.
So I know you said something about soil judging. Now, did you I know you said you didn't compete in FFA, but so were you in any CDEs? We have a lot of, we personally have a lot of CDEs at our school. So I was wondering if you're a mentor in that, or kind of how does that work?
I am not a mentor in it right now. There's not anyone I am mentoring. I would definitely recommend, if you don't have a mentor, to get one and kind of keep one. At this point in my life, I just don't have one. And I've been very busy with my family life. So soil judging, things like that, currently not doing anything with that. So no, not right now. Maybe in the future.
So as an extension agent, how do you balance the chemicals of the environment and the chemicals on in agricultural?
Question. That gets asked a lot these days. So through agriculture, where I'm able to help folks balance out their use of chemicals, and chemicals just being one tool in the tool belt that you use. We look at it more as the IPM pyramid, where you're going to scout for pests, you're going to culturally and mechanically, you're going to take care of your weeds and things like that before you get to the point at the top where you're using chemicals. And in between, you're going to have biological agents. So there's a whole pyramid for your integrated pest management before you get to the usage of chemicals. And once you do get to that point in agriculture as a farmer, you do want to be licensed. You want to get your education. You want to be certified. And I think most farmers, they adhere to that. They safely handle chemicals. They want to be around a long time for their families. So wearing personal protective equipment, safety being paramount, and always remember to read the label, which is the law, when you're dealing with chemicals. And those would be my things to help balance out the chemical usage.
Now, do you deal with farmers and people that grow hay, or do y'all kind of do with that, or not really?
More, I think for the Lowcountry, you're probably going to be your row crops that you're dealing with. Not as much hay, just not as much available land at this point with development coming in. But we are seeing a lot more smaller farms. One of the fastest growing occupations and things that you're seeing in Beaufort County are farms under 5 acres. And I think what folks have figured out is kind of what they figured out back in Roman times, that if you're close to an area that has high per capita income, like maybe in an area like Beaufort County, and you have less money that you tie up in your products like watermelons and tomatoes and strawberries, less distance and fuel, that you're able to charge more money in those areas. So in some of your more rural areas where you may be getting a quart of strawberries for $2, say in an area like maybe a Hilton Head, maybe you're getting $8 for a quart of strawberries. So your profit margin increases, which is good for your farmers.
Now,
an increase in there.
Now, did you grow up in the Lowcountry, or were you kind of grew up around Clemson?
No, I didn't grow up in the Lowcountry. I originally was born and grew up in Maryland.
Oh, wow. So what you doing down here in the darn boondocks we in?
So once I finished with my service in the Marine Corps, then I went to finish my degree using the GI Bill at the University of Maryland. And my wife was working in Washington, D.C. at the time, and I got a phone call when I was working at the U.S. National Arboretum, and a gentleman was from the Lowcountry and asked, would I be interested in helping him continue to grow his business? And I said yes, and that's about 30 years ago, and the rest is history.
So you mentioned the Arboretum. So what exactly is the Arboretum?
An arboretum is basically a plant museum. And what led me to the National Arboretum was once you get to the university level, these days you have to do an internship. And I applied for an internship at the U.S. National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. And I was lucky enough to be chosen for about 7 months to work there. And so I worked at the National Arboretum with Mr. Kevin Conrad, who Kevin is still there for, well, he's been there a long time, and may someday actually retire. But he's still running their internship program and overseeing their gardens that they have at the National Arboretum. With that being said, I also worked at the National Arboretum has a research facility that's been around a long time. Not a lot of people know about it, but there's a lot of rare plants. They do research, and scientists have a lot of experiments that they do, and they grow these plants out in their native environments and see how they do. And so as part of that, I was able to get some credit in my landscape architecture class at the time, and had to draw out the facility and do everything to scale and document everything that was there at the time. So that was able to be archived and kept at the National Arboretum. I also worked in their herbarium that they have. And a herbarium is basically when you go out, and if you're a plant explorer, you go kind of around the United States or around the world, and you collect these plants, and they press them, and they keep copies. They also keep the seeds, so that's kind of the future, right, with the seeds. So those are things that the National Arboretum is doing as part of their mission to be able to secure the future of agriculture, as well as ornamental plants and woody plants and things of that nature. So that's kind of what led me there to the National Arboretum.
So while you were traveling around the United States, what would you say was your favorite place to be, and what about it was interesting to you?
Favorite place, without a doubt, has to be the Lowcountry of South Carolina. The nicest people in the world.
I don't know about that.
So we just went through Hurricane Debbie. Kind of how does tropical systems affect plant life?
South Carolina, Georgia, we're seeing a lot more extreme weather events with things like Tropical Storm Debbie that just went through. A big part of that is saltwater intrusion with more development, more of the natural environment being altered, trees being removed, and not as much pasture land as we talked about earlier. You're really seeing the effects of the saltwater intrusion coming up with sea level rise, and that's affecting things from how you move these large volumes of water. You have established landscapes. There's a lot of plant material that has been brought in based on beauty, flower color, things of that nature, which may not necessarily be native to the Lowcountry, and probably are not able to handle the salinity of the water that gets into the soil. So that being said, you have a lot of native plants that are being used, which is great with your sable palms, your live oaks. They're more salt tolerant. They're able to handle that. So really in the Lowcountry, folks are trying to put it back the way it was before you started with a lot of development, and keeping it with native plants. And a great resource is if you go to the website for the South Carolina Native Plant Society. The Native Plant Society has several regions. You're going to have the upstate, you're going to have the Midlands, as well as Lowcountry and Lowcountry Coastal South, and that website has been redesigned. So it's a lot of great plants for landscape architects as well as homeowners. And what makes it so good is they've gone on to list where these native plants are actually available, so they're not so elusive, and you can actually find them in trade with the nurserymen now in the state.
So since being in the Lowcountry, do you have any problems with invasive species or anything?
Several invasive species. We deal with kudzu, which was brought in as an ornamental vine, tallow trees. That is a really invasive problem that we're having. So there's a hack and squirt program through the forestry department. They also have bounties on the calorie pear trees. You can bring in 3 pear trees and they'll give you 1 native tree. Typically it'll be live oak or a black gum or a, can't think of other ones, but there's several trees that they do give away with those. Invasives also include insects. There are the recent appearance 2 days ago in Hilton Head Island of the yellow-legged hornet, which is killing the honeybees in certain areas. They started over in Savannah, Georgia, and a gentleman discovered the nest up in the top of a pine tree about 85 feet off of the ground, and the nest was about the size of a car engine. So these bees are extremely invasive. They've been invasive in Europe as well as the Middle East, and they're now here in the Lowcountry of South Carolina. And the apiary folks from Clemson are on top of it. Mr. Ben Powell is kind of leading the charge with that, and they've been located these bees, these yellow-legged hornets. They've tried to set several traps, as well as they've located several of the nest, and just putting that in social media so that folks know what they're looking for. The gentleman that found the nest in Hilton Head for the invasive yellow-legged hornet actually saw and observed the hornets attacking the honeybees as they were trying to pollinate. And so he called it in to Clemson, and they were able to observe that and verify it and get the issue taken care of rather quickly. So yeah, invasives are definitely a thing, plants as well as insects.
Can you kind of explain to me what an urban horticulturalist between a regular horticulturalist?
I can try. With your urban horticulturist, a lot of times you're dealing with much smaller plots of land than you are when you're dealing with the regular horticulturist, who, again, also, they're dealing with acreage of your nurserymen that are growing out plants for consumption by your landscapers. It's not always the large estates that you're dealing with. It's much smaller areas as property is being divided up. And folks still want to be able to get outside and enjoy being able to garden. As we saw during COVID, folks really wanted to be outside and garden. And some of the things that you started to see were the soilless media. Soilless media, it's not so much the soil that you're seeing outside. Your soilless medias, with some of your companies that are creating these, they're not as easily soil tested, and they come with amendments already added to them. So they kind of set you up for success when you're doing vegetable gardening or you're propagating and starting from seed. So that's kind of things that you're seeing with your urban horticulture. On the tree side of things, you're seeing a lot of research that is being disseminated by your Clemson Extension agents on how to properly plant trees, how to properly irrigate your trees, what's the proper planting depth, how wide should the hole be, how deep should the hole be, looking at the quality of tree, when's the right time to remove tree stakes. So you're really trying to educate folks on what it is that they're actually seeing in the urban environment, because some folks may be moving from areas where they lived in an apartment. They never had a piece of land or a plot of land or even an area to put planting beds. So this is all new to them. They're kind of coming from the other side of it, where this is their first introduction to planting and gardening outside of indoor houseplants. So those are a couple of things that you'd see differently in your urban horticulture. Small areas of turf, things are always changing, and we're constantly trying to disseminate non-biased research-based information. This is not my opinion or any specific person's opinion. It's the non-biased research-based information that's backed up with scientific proof that you're trying to get to folks to set them up for success in their garden.
So how can we kind of get in touch with your office, with the extension program? Like, how can folks know how to get in touch with y'all?
It's going to be on the internet. If you type in Beaufort Extension in your Google bar, that's probably the easiest, quickest way to get a hold of us. If you have specific gardening questions, you can always go to the Home Gardening Information Center, which is hgic.com. And there are lots of fact sheets and articles on canning and other things that are on there. For our weekly podcast that we do with Clemson, you have the SC Grower podcast with Justin and Zach and Philip and some of the other folks that are going to be on the commercial horticulture side of things. So that's a great resource. You can always look up the horticultural department at Clemson University. Those are 4 great resources online that will get you kind of pointed in the right direction. It may not be the answer that you need, but it'll point you in the right direction. And what's so great about the Clemson University is you have the resources to have at your fingertips and able to make the phone calls to folks. If you don't know the information, just say you don't know it and point them in the right direction, and I'm sure there is someone there that can help you out. And we all work together for the success of the farmers and the local gardeners and things like that. So, yeah, those are great resources.
Our guest today has been Glen Payne, urban horticulturalist with the Clemson Cooperative Extension Service office in Beaufort. Mr. Payne, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate being here at the De La Howe Governor School, and go Aggies.
My name is Bella Tinch. On behalf of my co-host Lane Gibson, I want to thank you for watching this edition of Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water. I hope you will join us next time for another look at life on the farm here at South Carolina Governor's School for Agriculture at John De La Howe.
Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water, a closer look at agriculture in South Carolina, is a production of the student media team at the South Carolina Governor's School for Agriculture at John De La Howe. For more information on our school, visit our website at www.delahowe.sc.gov.